Imagine you are the commander of one of the most heavily defended countries on Earth. You have missiles, you have radars, you have systems that cost over $1 billion. You have spent 20 years building a shield around your nation, layer by layer, system by system. And tonight, that shield is pointed at the sky, ready, armed, and waiting. And then, silence. Not silence, because nothing is coming. Silence because your systems can no longer see what is coming. Your radars are alive but blind. Your missiles are loaded but lost. Your fighters are on the ground, engines ready, but no orders arrive. No signals, no targets, nothing. Somewhere above you, in the dark, over 125 American aircraft are moving through your airspace. 7 invisible bombers, carrying the largest conventional bombs ever built, are dropping toward your most protected underground sites. And you cannot see a single one of them. That is not a movie. That is not fiction. That is exactly what happened to Iran. On the night of June 21st into June 22nd, 2025. And the question the entire world started asking the very next morning was simple. How? How does one of the most defended countries in the Middle East go completely blind in the middle of the most important night of its modern history? The answer involves something the United States had never publicly confirmed before, a weapon so quiet, so invisible, so precise, that it did not explode, did not fire, did not make a sound, and yet it reached inside Iran's military nervous system and switched it off. This is the full story. Every layer, every detail. Nothing left out. To understand what happened on that night, you first have to understand what Iran actually had, because Iran's air defense system was not weak, not by any normal standard. For over 2 decades, Iran poured money, engineering, and national pride into building a shield that could stop the most advanced air forces in the world. They bought Russian systems. They built their own systems. They trained entire divisions of soldiers whose only job was to watch the sky. By 2025, Iran had what military analysts called a layered air defense, meaning multiple systems working at different heights, different ranges, different frequencies, all talking to each other and covering each other's blind spots. But Iran did not stop there, because they knew that depending entirely on a foreign system, one that Russia could cut off, one that enemies could study and understand, was a strategic risk. So Iran built their own version. They called it the Bavar 373. Iran's state media called it better than the S-300. They claimed it could detect targets over 250 kilometers away. They said it could track 60 targets at once and engage 6 simultaneously. Whether those numbers were real or boasting, the Bavar 373 was real. It existed, it was deployed, and it was placed around Iran's nuclear sites alongside the Russian systems. Then there were the shorter range systems, the Khordad 15, the Sevam Khordad, Iranian-built interceptors designed to catch what the big systems missed. Iran also had early warning radars near its borders with Iraq, designed to give commanders precious minutes of warning before any aircraft could reach the interior. On paper, this was a serious, multi-layered, expensive, and deeply practiced air defense network. Iran had run exercises with these systems. They had tested them. They had trained operators on them. They were confident enough to publicly declare that no enemy aircraft could penetrate Iranian airspace. And then June 2025 arrived, and every single one of those confident claims collapsed in real time. The first blow to Iran's air defense system did not happen in June. It happened months earlier, in October 2024. Israel had already been planning. After Iran launched a massive ballistic missile attack on Israeli territory in October 2024, Israel retaliated. Not with a massive bombing campaign, but with something more calculated. Israeli aircraft struck specific targets inside Iran, and what they chose to hit first was not a city, not a military base in the traditional sense. They struck Iran's S-300 radar systems. Radar is the brain of any surface-to-air missile system. The missiles themselves are just the arm. Without the radar, the arm cannot see, cannot aim, cannot fire. By destroying Iran's S-300 radars, the most critical and irreplaceable component of those billion-dollar systems, Israel had effectively blinded Iran's most capable air defense layer months before the June 2025 war even began. After those October strikes, analysts looking at satellite imagery noticed something disturbing. Several of Iran's S-300 sites appeared empty. The launchers were gone. The radars were gone. And there was very little hard evidence that Iran had successfully replaced them. Some experts noted that Iran had tried to hide the damage, moving remaining equipment, deploying decoys, and publicly parading military hardware to project confidence. But behind the image, the reality was that Iran's most powerful air defense layer had been quietly hollowed out before the main event even started. This matters enormously, because when June 2025 arrived, Iran was already starting from a position of serious weakness, and nobody outside of the intelligence world fully knew it yet. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched what would become known as the 12-Day War. It began with a wave of surprise strikes that shocked even experienced military analysts. Israel did not just attack missile sites or nuclear facilities, they attacked the people who ran Iran's military machine. 30 military commanders and nuclear scientists were killed in the opening days. Iran's chain of command, already stretched, suddenly had gaps at its highest levels. The people who made decisions, who understood the systems, who knew the playbooks, many of them were gone. At the same time, Israel deployed something that would prove to be one of the most decisive technologies of the entire conflict. Electronic warfare on a scale Iran had never faced before. Electronic warfare is not a missile. It is not a bomb. It is the weaponization of the electromagnetic spectrum, the invisible world of radio waves, radar frequencies, and data signals that all modern military systems depend on to function. Every air defense system, from the S-300 to the Bavar 373 to the simplest radar, communicates through the electromagnetic spectrum. Radar sends out a pulse, waits for it to bounce back off an aircraft, and uses that return signal to calculate distance, speed, and direction. Command centers send orders to missile launchers over radio. Operators talk to each other over encrypted channels. All of this communication happens through specific frequencies in the electromagnetic spectrum. Electronic warfare attacks those frequencies. It floods them with noise. It mimics them to send false information. It overwhelms them with signals so powerful that the real signals cannot get through. When electronic warfare is done correctly and at sufficient power, a radar that is physically undamaged and fully powered, a radar that is switched on and running, effectively goes blind. It cannot see through the noise. It cannot distinguish a real target from the electronic fog. Israel did this to Iran on an unprecedented level during the 12-Day War. Thomas Withington, one of the world's leading electronic warfare experts at the Royal United Services Institute in London, explained it clearly after the conflict. Israel's electronic warfare measures, he said, denied the Iranians the ability to use the electromagnetic spectrum to find targets, to guide either fighters or surface-to-air weapons to those targets, and to coordinate their entire air defense effort. By jamming radio communications, Israel was jamming one of the main channels through which Iran exchanged air defense information across its entire integrated system. When those channels go dark, the ability to coordinate interceptions collapses. Individual units might still be functional, but they cannot talk to each other, cannot receive targeting data, cannot act as part of a unified whole. They become isolated, confused, and effectively paralyzed. The result was that within days of Israel beginning its campaign, Israeli military commanders publicly stated that they had achieved what they called full aerial superiority over Iran. In less than a week, they claimed to have destroyed 120 of Iran's transporter erector launchers, the mobile vehicles that carry and fire surface-to-air missiles. Iran's fighters did not fly. Iran's missiles did not launch. The airspace over one of the most defended countries in the Middle East had, for all practical purposes, been opened, and the American strike had not even begun yet. By the time the United States began its own planning for what would become Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran's air defense system was already severely degraded. But degraded was not destroyed, and the United States was not sending a small strike package. They were sending 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the most expensive and capable aircraft the U.S. Air Force operates, deep into Iranian territory to drop the largest conventional bombs ever built onto 3 of Iran's most hardened underground nuclear sites. The risk of even a single American aircraft being shot down was something the U.S. military could not accept. Politically, militarily, and strategically, one lost aircraft changes everything. So the planning that went into protecting those aircraft was as sophisticated as the strike itself. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency had actually started studying Iran's underground nuclear sites and their vulnerabilities back in 2009, 16 years before the strike happened. The bombs that were eventually dropped, the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, had been designed specifically to reach and destroy deeply buried and hardened targets. Each one weighs 30,000 pounds. Each B-2 carried 2 of them. The engineering behind those weapons had been refined for over a decade, with exactly this kind of mission in mind. But even the most powerful bomb in the American arsenal cannot do its job if the aircraft carrying it gets shot down before it reaches the target. And that is where the secret weapon comes in. The weapon that, until recently, the United States had never publicly confirmed using. On the night of June 21st into June 22nd, 2025, as 7 B-2 bombers departed Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and began an 18-hour nonstop flight toward Iran, refueling 3 times in midair, flying with minimal radio communications to avoid detection, U.S. Cyber Command carried out a digital operation against Iran's military systems. The Recorded Future News Organization, working with multiple U.S. officials who agreed to speak on condition of anonymity due to national security concerns, broke this story. What they revealed is this: the U.S. military digitally infiltrated and disrupted the Iranian military systems connected to the air defense network, protecting the nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The cyber attack specifically targeted what officials described as a military system, the nature of which the officials asked not to be revealed, that was connected to Iran's surface-to-air missile launch infrastructure. The effect was precise and devastating. When American F-35 and F-22 stealth fighters entered Iranian airspace ahead of the bombers, deliberately, specifically to provoke a response, to draw out any surface-to-air missiles that might be lurking and ready, Iran's defense systems did not fire. They did not launch. According to General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who spoke at a Pentagon press conference after the operation concluded, Iran's fighters did not fly, and it appears that its surface-to-air missile systems did not see them, chose not to fire, not the missiles malfunctioned, the systems did not see the aircraft, which means the systems that were supposed to detect and track American aircraft were not functioning. Something had gotten inside them and turned off their ability to see. To understand exactly what this means, think of a modern air defense system as a chain. It starts with a sensor, the radar that detects an incoming aircraft. The radar passes that information to a command computer, which processes the data, identifies the threat, and plots an intercept course. The command computer passes orders to the missile launcher. The launcher fires. The missile guides itself to the target using either its own radar or signals from the ground station. Every link in that chain is connected to every other link through some form of communication. Electronic signals, data networks, radio frequencies. Remove any single link and the chain breaks. The missile does not fire, not because the launcher is broken, not because the radar is destroyed, but because the connection between them has been severed. As one official familiar with the cyber attack told Recorded Future News, military systems often rely on a complex series of components, all working correctly. A vulnerability or weakness at any point can be used to disrupt the entire system. This is what Cyber Command exploited. They found a vulnerability, a crack in the digital architecture of Iran's air defense command and control, and they used it to sever the chain. The radar might have been running, the missiles might have been loaded, the launchers might have been pointed at the sky. But the invisible thread connecting them, the digital nervous system that told each component what the others were seeing and doing, had been cut. And the result was that 125 American aircraft moved through Iranian airspace over the course of 25 minutes, dropped 14 of the largest conventional bombs ever used in combat, launched over 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles from a submarine positioned in the northern Arabian Sea, and hit 3 nuclear facilities. And Iran could not stop a single one of them. General Dan Kane stood at the podium at the Pentagon press conference on June 22, 2025, and publicly praised U.S. Cyber Command's contribution to the strike. He said the command had supported the strike package that saw all 3 nuclear sites hit in less than half an hour. He did not give details. The officials who spoke to Recorded Future News specifically asked that certain technical details be withheld for national security reasons. And U.S. Cyber Command released a statement that said simply, and with an unmistakable edge of pride, that the command was proud to support Operation Midnight Hammer and was fully equipped to execute orders at any time and in any place. This was not the first time Cyber Command had done something like this. Weeks before the Iran operation, Cyber Command had conducted a cyber attack in Venezuela as part of a mission to capture President Nicolas Maduro. In that operation, officials say the command knocked out power to Venezuela's capital city and disrupted air defense radar systems as well as handheld military radios. The parallels to what happened in Iran are exact. Radar disrupted, communications severed, military coordination broken. Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, who chairs the Senate Armed Services Cyber Subcommittee, spoke about this publicly. He noted that Venezuela and Iran together were good examples of what happens when you combine all joint forces, including cyber operations, into a single, synchronized package. He pointed out that many people watching the news were now curious about these operations, and that they might want to be part of the team that does this kind of work in the future. Erica Lonergan, a researcher at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, put it plainly after both operations became public. She said that Iran and Venezuela represented ideal use cases for cyber operations as enablers of conventional military operations. Both operations, she said, reflect the routinization, the normalization, of cyber capabilities during military action. And we should expect to see more of this in the future. That phrase is worth sitting with for a moment. The routinization of cyber weapons in warfare. What that means is that what happened to Iran on June 22nd, 2025, the invisible digital strike that turned off an entire country's ability to see incoming aircraft, is no longer an experiment. It is now standard practice. It is now part of the playbook. Every future military operation by the United States will consider how cyber tools can be used not instead of bombs, but alongside them, to create windows of blindness, moments of confusion, gaps in command and control that allow physical strikes to land without opposition. Now, let us look at what those physical strikes actually accomplished, and where the story becomes more complicated. The 7 B-2 bombers, each carrying 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, struck the Fordo and Natanz nuclear facilities. A separate Ohio-class guided missile submarine, positioned in the northern Arabian Sea, launched over 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles at the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center. The operation involved approximately 75 precision-guided weapons in total. According to General Kane, all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. President Trump declared the strikes had completely and totally obliterated Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities. But here is where the story splits into 2 versions, the official version and the intelligence version. Weeks after the strike, a leaked assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, painted a very different picture. According to sources cited by CNN, the core components of Iran's nuclear program may not have been destroyed. The centrifuges, the machines that actually enrich uranium, and Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium may have been relocated before the attack. The damage, according to this assessment, appeared to be largely limited to above-ground infrastructure, power systems, support buildings, surface-level facilities. The deeply buried components, the ones that actually matter for a nuclear weapon, may have survived. A July 2025 Pentagon review took a more measured position, concluding that Iran's nuclear program had likely been set back by around 2 years. Not obliterated, not destroyed permanently, set back by roughly 2 years. Israeli sources also reported that the level of destruction at Fordo, which was considered the most critical and most hardened site, was less than had been anticipated. Fordo is built deep inside a mountain. It was designed specifically to survive conventional bombing. And while the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators are the most powerful conventional bunker-busting bombs ever built, developed specifically for this kind of target, tested for over a decade, questions remained about whether they reached deep enough to destroy the most critical equipment inside. So the honest picture is this. Operation Midnight Hammer was an extraordinary military achievement in terms of execution, coordination, and the use of cyber warfare to create the conditions for a successful strike. The aircraft got through, the bombs were dropped, the missiles hit, not a single American aircraft was lost. The invisible cyber weapon worked exactly as designed. But whether it achieved its strategic objective, whether it truly stopped Iran's path to a nuclear weapon or only slowed it, remains an open and genuinely contested question. Iran's response to the strike, when it came, told its own story. On June 23, 2025, the day after the American strikes, Iran launched a missile barrage at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Al Udeid is one of the largest American military installations in the world, serving as the regional headquarters for U.S. Central Command. Iran had warned both Qatar and the United States before the attack, a deliberate signal that this was a measured response, not an all-out escalation. Iran wanted to retaliate, but it also wanted to control the scope of that retaliation. President Trump dismissed the Iranian strike as a very weak response. He thanked Iran for giving early notice. He called on Iran to pursue peace. Within 5 hours of that Iranian strike, Trump announced that Iran and Israel had agreed to a ceasefire. The 12-day war was over. But the silence that followed the ceasefire was not peace. It was the silence of calculation, both sides assessing what had just happened, what it meant, and what came next. Iran's military deputy for operations, Mahmoud Mousavi, went on record and said something that took some courage to admit. He acknowledged that some of Iran's air defenses had been damaged. He said, and this is a direct acknowledgement from inside the Iranian military, this is not something we can hide. But he added that Iran had used domestic resources and pre-positioned backup systems to replace what was lost, and that Iranian airspace remained secure. The admission itself was significant. Iran was not claiming it had successfully defended its airspace. It was saying that, despite the damage, it was rebuilding. And rebuilding is exactly what Iran began doing, immediately, urgently, and with a new understanding of exactly what its weaknesses were. The June 2025 war had exposed something that Iran's military establishment found deeply uncomfortable. Its air defense systems, including both the Russian S-300 and its own Bavar 373, had failed completely against Israeli and American air power. The Bavar 373, which Iran had publicly boasted was comparable to the Russian S-400, one of the most advanced air defense systems on Earth, recorded not a single interception during the entire 12-day conflict. Not one. Iran had spent enormous resources building a system that, when tested against real adversaries with real electronic warfare and real stealth technology, produced nothing. The reasons are interconnected. The S-300 radar systems had been destroyed or degraded in the Israeli strikes of October 2024, long before the June war. Iran's indigenous systems, despite their impressive sounding specifications, had never been tested in combat against high-end electronic warfare. And when that warfare arrived, it broke them. The entire air defense network, which was supposed to be integrated, all the parts talking to each other, covering each other's gaps, turned out to be, in the words of one analyst, a fragmented mix of Russian, Chinese, and local systems that were not adequately integrated and could not function as a cohesive whole under the pressures of modern electronic warfare. So Iran began looking for solutions, not just replacements, fundamental restructuring. Satellite imagery from February 2026 showed something interesting and alarming to Western intelligence analysts. S-300 launchers were reappearing at air defense sites near Tehran and Isfahan, but the radar components, the brains of the system, were not visible, which means Iran has launchers that cannot function as designed, because the systems needed to make them work are either destroyed, relocated to hidden positions, or being rebuilt from scratch. At the same time, Iran was reported to be in discussions to acquire China's HQ-9B air defense system, China's most advanced export-grade surface-to-air missile, with an engagement range exceeding 200 kilometers and multi-target tracking capabilities. If that acquisition proceeds, it would represent a significant upgrade over what Iran had in June 2025. It would also represent a fundamental shift in Iran's strategy, away from dependence on Russia and toward China as its primary military technology partner. And most urgently of all, Iran was rebuilding its nuclear infrastructure. By February 2026, just 8 months after the American strikes, satellite imagery showed Iranian engineers sealing underground facility entrances at Isfahan with concrete and soil, burying tunnel entrances at nuclear sites and repairing missile bases. Significantly, Iran was engineering the reconstruction deeper underground, specifically, deliberately, strategically designed to defeat the same bunker-busting bombs that had hit them in June. The 2-year window that the Pentagon assessment had projected was shrinking. Iran was not accepting the timeline. Iran was racing against it. And this is where the story does not end, because the story has not ended. On February 28, 2026, just days before this script was written, the United States and Israel launched another coordinated joint operation against Iran. This one went far beyond nuclear facilities. This one, codenamed Operation Roaring Lion by Israel and Operation Epic Fury by the U.S. Department of Defense, targeted key Iranian officials, military commanders, and facilities. This operation included the reported assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, the most dramatic and consequential single action in the entire arc of the conflict. The situation as of today is one that no analyst had fully predicted even a year ago. Iran's nuclear program has been struck. Its military leadership has been decimated. Its air defense system was exposed as fundamentally inadequate against fifth-generation aircraft and coordinated electronic warfare. Its supreme leader is gone, and the country is in what one intelligence report described as the most severe legitimacy crisis in its 47-year history. And yet Iran is not finished. It is rebuilding. It is adapting. It is going deeper underground, acquiring new systems, restructuring its military doctrine. Iran's ability to launch offensive missile and drone attacks, to retaliate, to threaten, to impose costs, has not been destroyed. And the threat of Iranian proxy forces, sleeper cells, and cyber operations remains real and active. The United States, for its part, has now demonstrated something it had long prepared but never fully revealed, that cyber warfare is not a tool of espionage or disruption. It is a weapon of war, a weapon precise enough to reach inside a foreign country's military systems, find the digital connections that hold those systems together and break them, silently, invisibly, in the moments before bombs fall. The world has watched what happened to Iran's air defenses and taken notes. Every military in the world is now asking the same question. Are our systems vulnerable to the same attack? Are our radars, our missile launchers, our command networks, are they only as strong as the digital connections holding them together? And if someone finds those connections and cuts them, will we end up in the same darkness that Iran found itself in on the night of June 21st, 2025? Here is what we know for certain. More than 125 American aircraft entered Iranian airspace on that night. 7 B-2 stealth bombers flew FOR 18 hours from Missouri, refueled 3 times in midair, dropped 14 of the largest conventional bombs ever used in combat, and returned home safely. A submarine launched more than 24 cruise missiles from under the surface of the Arabian Sea. Not a single American aircraft was lost. Not a single surface-to-air missile was fired at them. Not a single Iranian fighter rose to intercept them. The air defenses of a country that had spent billions of dollars and 2 decades building a shield around its most critical sites went dark. And they went dark because the United States had done something quietly, years in the making, invisible until the moment it mattered. It had found the digital nerve of Iran's military system, and on the most important night in decades, it reached in and switched it off. That is the secret weapon, not a new bomb, not a faster missile, not a better radar. The secret weapon was code. The secret weapon was access. The secret weapon was the patient, invisible work of understanding exactly how a complex military system depends on digital connections and knowing exactly which one to cut. General Kane called it supporting the strike package. The officials who spoke anonymously described it in quiet, technical language. But what it really was, stripped of all the careful words, was a new kind of warfare, one where the most important weapon is not the one you can see. It is the one that makes sure the enemy cannot see you. Iran's air defenses went dark because America turned off the light. And the world will never think about air power, cyber power, or the future of warfare the same way again.